Hello guys, and welcome to Sleepumentary. Tonight we are going to drift together into a story that feels less like history and more like a dream or perhaps a forgotten memory. As you lie back as your breathing begins to slow, imagine with me, what if everything we've been taught about human civilization is only a fragment of the truth? What if there was a whole chapter of our story older than the pyramids, older than writing, older than everything we recognize as history, that has been erased almost completely, leaving behind only whispers? We're taught to think of history as a straight line. You open a textbook and the story begins with hunters and gatherers, then small villages, then kingdoms and nations. From there, cities rise, empires fall, and eventually rockets launch into the stars. It feels neat. It feels inevitable. A clear climb from stone tools to space travel. But sometimes the neatest stories are also the most misleading. Because the truth is, this timeline isn't based on knowing everything that has ever happened. It's based only on what little we've been able to dig up, on what fragile pieces of evidence have managed to survive the slow violence of time. Pause and think about that for a moment. Imagine picking up a book that has only the last few pages intact, the rest burned away. You'd assume the story started just before the ending, wouldn't you? That's what we've done with history. We assume civilization began around 10,000 years ago, because that is when the earliest surviving monuments, cities and records appear. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if there were entire chapters before those pages, chapters that crumbled into dust, chapters lost beneath the ocean, chapters far so swallowed by the slow grind of glaciers and shifting earth? The question no one thinks to utter is not just what if we're missing a city or an empire. It's something bigger, more unsettling. What if Earth once hosted an advanced society 100,000 years ago? Not just scattered hunters living hand to mouth, but a civilization, one that rose, thrived, and then vanished so completely that almost no trace remains. At first, the idea sounds impossible. Our image of the distant past is filled with caves, stone tools, and animal hides. We picture small bands of people surviving day by day, with no time or means to create anything like science or cities. Yet that picture is not the whole truth. It is only a story built on what has survived. And survival is rare. Over spans of 100 millennia, rain wears down mountains, ice grinds the earth like sandpaper, and seas rise to drown entire landscapes. Even the tallest skyscraper, if left untended, would collapse into dust within a few thousand years. Multiply that times 100, and the silence of time becomes absolute. So when archaeologists say there is no evidence, that doesn't necessarily mean nothing was there. It might only mean time has done its work. We haven't looked in the right places. Or worse, we've looked, but we didn't recognize what we were seeing. And if that thought unsettles you, let it. Because it means our modern world, with its lights, its machines, its endless data, might not be the first. It might only be the latest. That changes everything. It means we are not unique. We are not guaranteed permanence. We are not the inevitable peak of human potential, but perhaps one flare among many that have lit up Earth's long, shadowy night. And if such a civilization once existed, then we have to ask the hardest question of all. What happened to them? Did they destroy themselves? Were they undone by something beyond their control, or did they simply fade away, leaving the planet to reset to wait for us? The story you're about to hear isn't only about the past, it is also about the future. Because if it happened once before, it could happen again. And maybe, just maybe, we're not the beginning of the story. Maybe we're somewhere in the middle. The limits of our timeline. When we speak of history, we often forget that what we call the record is not a full chronicle. It is a patchwork quilt stitched together from fragments that manage to endure. Every artifact, every ruin, every inscription is a survivor of a lottery stacked heavily against survival. The story we tell of ourselves is not built on certainty, but on what little remains after time has swept most of it away. Think of Sumer, often described as the first civilization. Around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, in the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates, cities like Uruk and Ur blossomed with writing, monumental architecture and government. We call this the beginning because we can still see it. We can still walk among the broken ziggurats, trace cuneiform wedges carved into clay tablets hardened by fire. But does that mean it truly was the beginning, or only the earliest place where the evidence has clung long enough for us to find it? The assumption that nothing came before Sumer rests on fragile ground. The further back we look, the more silence we encounter. 12,000 years ago, the end of the last ice age. Our picture fades to cave art burial sites and enigmatic structures like Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey, a temple complex over 11,000 years old, deliberately buried and only rediscovered in the 19th. For decades, the consensus had been that religion and monumental architecture could not predate agriculture. Then one discovery shattered that neat timeline. How many more could be waiting in places we have not thought to dig? How a timeline is not a chain of unbroken evidence, but a series of stepping stones across a river of time. Between each stone is a gap filled with rushing water, the lost, the eroded, the forgotten. We leap from one to the next and assume there is nothing in between. It is human nature to crave order, to prefer a clean beginning and a clear end. But the past resists neatness. It decays unevenly like ink fading at random across a manuscript. Some sentences survive, others vanish entirely, leaving us to guess what the missing words once meant. The archaeologist's spade is not neutral. It uncovers only what time has permitted and what our own expectations allow us to search for. That is why we see civilization as recent, fragile, and miraculous, because all earlier traces, if they ever existed, have long since been erased. But perhaps the more sobering truth is this: the idea of no civilization before Sumer is not a fact. It is an assumption built on silence. And silence, especially when stretched across 100,000 years, is not proof of nothing. It is proof only of how much we do not yet know. Humans are older than history. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself standing on a timeline that stretches across a vast plain. Each step you take represents a century. 10 steps carry you from today back to the Middle Ages. 50 steps bring you to the pyramids of Egypt. But if you want to walk all the way back to the true beginning of our species, Homo sapiens, you will need to walk 3,000 steps, 3,000 centuries, 300,000 years. That is how long our kind has been here, people with the same bodies, the same minds, and the same capacity for thought, emotion, and imagination as you and I. Yet of those 300,000 years, only the last 5,000 or 6,000 contain what we call civilization. Writing agriculture, organized cities, states, monuments, those things we think define humanity fill just a sliver at the end of the line. Less than 5% of our entire existence. So what about the other 95%? That enormous blank stretch of time when we were alive, intelligent and capable, but have left behind only stone tools, a few ochre-stained bones, and the flicker of cave paintings. Did we truly do nothing in all those tens of thousands of years except huddle around fires and chase animals? Or have we simply lost almost everything we once created? The gap is dizzying. Picture a library where 1,000 shelves should be filled with books, but only the final shelf remains intact. We leaf through those surviving volumes and convince ourselves the story begins there, but deep down we know better. We know that once there were other books, entire histories burned away, leaving us with fragments that whisper of what was lost. Homo sapiens were not dim shadows of ourselves. Fossil skulls from 200,000 years ago reveal brain sizes as large or larger than modern averages. Evidence shows they crafted tools with care, decorated their bodies with pigments, and almost certainly spoke languages rich enough to share myths and strategies. These were not half-formed humans, but fully human beings standing on the same earth, looking up at the same stars, dreaming thoughts we may never know. And yet when we tell their story, we compress it into a footnote: prehistoric people. That phrase alone betrays our blindness. Prehistory simply means history we haven't written down. It does not mean nothing happened. For hundreds, yes, of thousands of years, people lived, loved, fought, invented, and perhaps even built things beyond what we expect. Their stories are not gone because they never existed. They are gone because time is merciless at erasing. This is the haunting truth. 95% of our human journey is a blank page. The question is not whether those pages are empty. The question is whether we will ever recover even a sentence of what was once written there. Absence of evidence versus evidence of absence. We are often told, almost with a sense of finality, that there is no evidence of civilization before the first cities of Mesopotamia and Egypt. The words sound conclusive, as though the case has been closed. But here is where language misleads us. No evidence does not mean proof of absence. It means only that nothing has survived for us to find, or perhaps that we have not yet looked in the right places or with the right eyes. The difference matters. Imagine walking across a desert after a sandstorm. The footprints, the campfires, the tents, all are gone. The landscape looks untouched, but that does not mean no one was ever there. It only means the desert has done its work. Time is a far more patient and relentless eraser than sand. Over tens of thousands of years, almost everything we make our metals, our plastics, our buildings crumbles back into the earth. If our own civilization vanished tomorrow, how much would remain after 100,000 years? Perhaps a thin chemical signature in the soil, maybe a few shards of glass or pottery, but little more. This is what scientists call survival bias, the reality that we reconstruct the past from the tiny fraction of things that endure. Durable stone tools survive, pigment sealed in caves survive. The rest, the wood, the fabrics, the shelters, the intricate creations of daily life decay into nothing. Because of this, we picture our ancestors as crude and primitive, surrounded only by rocks and bones, when in truth they may have filled their world with objects and knowledge that simply didn't last. Consider Göbekli Tepe. Again, massive carved pillars arranged in circles 11,000 years old, buried under earth, until they were rediscovered in the late 20th century. For centuries, farmers ploughed fields above those stones, with no idea what lay beneath. If even a monument of that size could remain hidden, until so recently, what chance would more fragile or perishable traces have after 100 millennia? Our timelines then are not maps of certainty, but maps of survival. They tell us less about what actually happened, and more about what has managed to endure long enough for us to notice. We fill in the silence with assumptions that nothing complex could have existed before writing that no cities rose before Sumer, that no advanced knowledge flickered before Egypt. But those are not facts. They are placeholders born from absence. And perhaps the most humbling truth is this: silence does not mean nothing was there. It only means time has hidden its voice. A thought experiment. If our world ended today, imagine for a moment that tomorrow everything stopped. No more lights, no more engines, no more hum of machines. Humanity is gone, and the world carries on without us. At first, our cities would stand like silent tombs, skyscrapers glinting in the sun, bridges stretching across empty rivers, satellites orbiting above a planet that no longer listens. But time has a way of reclaiming what we build, and its patience is infinite. Within a few years, weeds would crack the pavement. Vines would creep up glass towers, roots splitting concrete as if it were nothing more than soft clay. Metal rusts quickly when exposed to rain and air. Cars would flake into orange powder bridges, collapsing under their own corroded weight. Wooden houses would rot their beams, collapsing into heaps. Fast forward 1,000 years, forests grow where suburbs once spread. Wolves roam through the shelves of department stores. The Eiffel Tower has fallen. The Statue of Liberty lies in fragments. The great skyscrapers of New York and Shanghai are piles of rubble, their steel skeletons twisted and broken. Plastics once thought indestructible have been gnawed by sunlight, weathered by rain, broken into tiny fragments, washed into the sea. 10,000 years the ruins are buried under layers of soil. Rivers have shifted their courses, erasing maps. Entire coastlines look different as seas rise and fall. Cities that once gleamed along the shore are drowned beneath the waves. The desert sands have swallowed highways. Glaciers have bulldozed valleys clean. The traces of our world are fading fast. And then 100,000 years, long enough for entire mountain ranges to grow taller, for continents to creep across the map, for new ice ages to advance and retreat. What would remain of us then? A thin line of radioactive isotopes in the soil, a spike of carbon trapped in ancient ice, perhaps a few fossils of our bones in caves or riverbeds. Almost nothing of our towers, our machines, and our monuments would still stand. This is not speculation. It is science. Geologists can show us how quickly stone crumbles, how metals corrode, how entire landscapes transform. Earth is not a museum preserving our work. It is a restless moving surface that grinds its own history into dust. So if someone or something were to come after us digging 100 millennia into the future, what would they find? Would they assume that no great civilization ever lived here because no skyscraper survived, no car remained, no city wall still stood? Would they look at a faint chemical signature in the soil and shrug it off as a natural oddity? The uncomfortable truth is this: if we were to vanish tonight in 100,000 years, almost nothing recognizable would be left of us. The same could have happened before. The silence of the deep past does not prove no civilization existed. It only proves how easily Earth erases her stories. the world of 100,000 BCE. Close your eyes and imagine stepping out of a time machine into the world of 100,000 years ago. At first glance, the continents are familiar. You would still recognize the outlines of Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Americas. But the details would feel alien, like seeing a face you know with features subtly rearranged. This is the Ice Age, a time when the planet was colder, drier, and wilder. Massive glaciers stretched like white walls across much of North America, northern Europe, and Siberia. These ice sheets are not delicate. They are mountains of frozen water, kilometers thick, grinding across the land with slow, unstoppable force. Beneath them, valleys of carved boulders are scattered, and everything in their path is erased. Where today you would find the English Channel, there is no water at all. Britain is not an island, but a peninsula, connected by rolling plains to mainland Europe. Farther north, what we now call the North Sea is dry land, an expanse later known as Doggerland, once rich with rivers, forests, and herds of grazing animals. Across the globe, sea levels are more than 100 meters lower than today, exposing entire landscapes we now think of as ocean. In the Far East, Siberia is linked to Alaska by a vast land bridge called Beringia. Wide and windswept, it connects Asia and the Americas, a highway of grass and tundra, across which mammoth herds and small bands of humans wander. Australia too is larger, fused with New Guinea and Tasmania into a single supercontinent known as Sahul, fringed with coasts that today lie underwater. The world is harsher, yes, but not a frozen wasteland. The tropics remain warm, their forests alive with birds and insects. Deserts stretch farther than they do now, dry winds whipping sand across ancient dunes. Grasslands sprawl where forests will one day grow home to wild horses, bison, and predators long vanished from our age. The planet feels raw, untamed, and immense, its beauty edged with danger, and through it all humans are present. Small groups of Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans scatter across this landscape. Their numbers are tiny compared to today pockets of people separated by vast distances of wilderness. Nights are lit not by the glow of cities, but by the shimmer of firelight and the steady canopy of stars. If you could look down from above, you would see a planet almost empty of people, most of its surface untouched, yet alive with possibility. It is in this strange and shifting earth that the great mystery lies. We see the glaciers, the exposed plains, the vanished coasts. We can reconstruct the climate, the geography, even the animals that roamed. But what we cannot see clearly is what humans were truly doing within it. Were they only struggling to survive, or were some of them somewhere creating things we would recognize as civilization? Stop! Who walked the earth there? Then if you had stepped into that Ice Age world of 100,000 years ago, you would not have walked alone. Across the continents were scattered small resilient bands of people, our ancestors and their close cousins. In Africa, Homo sapiens, the species we call our own, had already been living for nearly 200,000 years. They looked like us, thought like us, and shared our same spark of imagination. Fossils show faces you would recognize instantly, eyes set forward, brows arched, hands built for precision, brains as large as yours. These were not half-formed creatures fumbling toward humanity. They were human in every way that matters. To the north and west in Europe and parts of Western Asia, Neanderthals roamed. Stockier than us, their bodies were adapted for cold climates with wide chests and powerful limbs. For centuries they were painted as brutish cavemen, slouching, grunting, barely scraping by. But that caricature has been steadily erased. We now know Neanderthals buried their dead with care-crafted, sophisticated stone tools and painted on cave walls long before the first Egyptian pyramid rose. They made jewellery from shells, mixed pigments into paints, and may even have told stories by firelight. Far from being simple, they were creators in their own right. Farther east in the shadowy highlands of Siberia and Central Asia, another branch of humanity lived, the Denisovans. Only fragments of their bones remain, but in those fragments, we find a genetic legacy that still flows in us today, especially among populations in Asia and Oceania. They are the great mystery cousins largely unseen, but their DNA whispers that they were more widespread and more advanced than we once dared imagine. These three Homo sapiens, Neanderthals and Denisovans, sometimes coexisted, sometimes competed, and sometimes mingled. Their worlds overlapped not only in geography but in culture. We know from genetic studies that they interbred. Their children carried bloodlines that live on within us now. Imagine the mingling of ideas, the borrowing of techniques, the blending of languages. The boundaries between them were not as sharp as we often believe. And here is where the speculation grows intriguing. If Neanderthals could paint, if Denisovans could craft jewelry, and if Homo sapiens could carve intricate figurines from ivory tens of thousands of years before writing was invented, then what else might they have achieved that has not survived? Could there have been pockets of brilliance, enclaves of knowledge, even attempts at building communities far more sophisticated than we've been taught to expect? Archaeology shows us their scattered tools, pigments, and bones, but imagination reminds us of what might be missing. Perhaps somewhere on those vanished coastlines, or buried beneath layers of ice, there once stood more than a campfire in a cave. Perhaps there were experiment structures, systems, ideas that flickered briefly only to be lost in the long night of time. The primitive image vises the hidden reality. When most of us picture early humans, the image is almost always the same shaggy-headed figures wrapped in animal semlutsam and skinskins crouched at the mouth of a cave clutching a crude stone tool. They grunt, gesture, and huddle against the cold surviving day-to-day with little more than instinct. It is an image repeated in textbooks, films, and even jokes the caveman as the symbol of something less than fully human. But the truth is far more complex and far more humbling. Those same cavemen had brains just as large and complex as ours, their minds lit up with the same electrical storms of memory, imagination, and problem-solving. They could feel love, grief, wonder. They could plan hunts, share myths, sing around fires. They were not shadows stumbling toward intelligence. They were us simply born into a harsher world. The stereotype of skins and caves persists because those are the artifacts that survive. Stone tools endure where wood rots. Caves preserve pigments where open air destroys them. But just because we have found stone and pigment does not mean that was the limit of their world. Survival bias has fooled us into thinking the durable was the only thing that existed. Consider this: if they had woven cloth-built houses of wood or crafted objects of bone and plant fiber, those things would almost certainly have vanished by now. Even advanced materials, organic composites stronger than steel, or plant-based polymers more flexible than our plastics would leave no recognizable trace after tens of thousands of years. An entire technological tradition could rise, flourish, and be obliterated without a single shard left for us to find. And what of language? Archaeologists cannot dig up sentences, but every clue points to the fact that Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans had the vocal structures and cognitive abilities for speech. Imagine the richness of oral traditions passed down for generations, stories, histories, perhaps even sciences, none of which could survive without writing. What remains for us are the silences, the blank pages, while the spoken knowledge itself has dissolved into air. We imagine them as primitive because we want to see ourselves as special, as the first to be truly modern. Yet perhaps the difference is not that they were incapable, but that their achievements did not take the forms we expect. They may have experimented, innovated, even built in ways that time has erased. The truth is, we cannot be certain how far their brilliance reached. And so the image of the caveman crouched in darkness may be less a portrait of reality and more a mirror of our own need to feel superior. Behind that image lies the hidden reality, people every bit as human as we are, perhaps carrying knowledge and skills now lost forever. Fragility of materials. When we look backward into the deep past, what do we actually see? Almost without exception, stone. Stone tools, stone flakes, stone carvings. And so we imagine a world built almost entirely of rock and bone. But that is only because stone is stubborn. It endures where almost everything else we create dissolves into nothing. Wood, for instance, is one of the most versatile materials humans have ever worked with. Spears, shelters, furniture, boats, all could have been crafted from it 100,000 years ago. But wood is also fragile. Unless buried in peat bogs or frozen in permafrost, it rots within decades. A wooden temple or tower, no matter how carefully built, would vanish long before reaching us. Textiles are even more fleeting. We know humans wove fibers into cord and fabric at least 30,000 years ago because rare impressions of woven material survive pressed into ancient clay. But cloth decays quickly, leaving almost no trace. Society clothed in bright woven garments could disappear into the soil without a thread to prove it. Organic composites, the kind of materials our ancestors could easily have experimented with, leave even less. Bone can crumble, shells can be ground to dust, plant fibers can be eaten away by microbes. Even leather, if not perfectly preserved, vanishes within centuries. And stone itself, the material we think of as eternal, is not immune. The sharp edges of a flint blade are dulled by time, reshaped by pressure, ground down by wind and water. Carved statues blur until they resemble natural rocks. Even mighty monuments can vanish. The Sphinx itself has been worn almost to featurelessness by little more than desert wind and rain. What we call the archaeological record is not the story of everything that was made, it is the story of what was durable. The fragile and the delicate, the imaginative and the experimental are gone. This survival bias paints the past as crude because only crude materials survive. We assume our ancestors were primitive because the refined parts of their world dissolved long ago. Imagine if future archaeologists 100,000 years from now found only our stoneware mugs and kitchen knives but none of our electronics, books or fabrics. Would they conclude that we were a stone and clay society? Would they think us simple blind to the fact that entire technologies had once existed beyond what the surviving fragments suggested? This is exactly what we risk when we gaze into our own past. The fragile vanishes, the durable remains. And from those scraps we weave a story that may be less about truth and more about endurance. History is not always progress. We like to imagine history as a staircase, each step carrying us higher than the last, each discovery building permanently on those that came before. But the truth is far less comforting. History does not move in a straight line. It rises, falls, and sometimes forgets. Whole bodies of knowledge have been discovered, mastered, and then lost as fragile as parchment left in the rain. Take Roman concrete. For centuries, builders of the Roman Empire created structures so enduring that they still stand today harbours aqueducts and domes that defied erosion and the sea. Their formula gave their concrete the ability to grow stronger over time, healing itself with chemical reactions that modern scientists are only just beginning to understand. Yet when Rome fell, that knowledge vanished. For over 1,000 years, humanity struggled to build with the same durability our own concrete weaker than that of people 2,000 years gone. Or consider Greek fire, the terrifying weapon of the Byzantine navy. It could ignite on water, clinging to ships and soldiers alike, burning with an intensity that struck terror into enemies. Chronicles describe it as unstoppable, a flame that spread even across the waves. Yet its recipe was guarded so carefully, so completely, that when the empire crumbled, the secret was lost forever. To this day, no one knows exactly how it was made. Then there is the Antikythera mechanism found in the wreck of an ancient Greek ship. A device of bronze gears astonishing in its precision, built 2,000 years ago. It could track the motions of the planets, predict eclipses, and mark the cycles of the Olympic Games. For centuries we thought such complexity impossible until the Middle Ages, yet here it was rusted and broken, proving the ancients knew more than we imagined. And after it sank beneath the waves, the technology disappeared for over a millennium. These are not all isolated stories. Across the world, civilizations have risen to brilliance and then fallen into silence, their knowledge scattered, like ashes in the wind. The Maya created calendars more accurate than European ones centuries later, yet their cities were swallowed by jungle. The libraries of Alexandria, packed with scrolls of ancient wisdom, burned into smoke. What humanity once knew has been lost again and again. If knowledge can vanish in a few centuries, what of tens of thousands of years? If a single empire's fall can erase technologies, what could 100,000 years of storms, floods, and glaciers erase? The idea that everything is remembered, everything accumulates is a comforting illusion. History is not always progress. It is fragile, breakable, and prone to collapse. And if that is true, and in the last 2 millennia, how much more may have been lost in the long unrecorded ages before nature? The Great Eraser. If there is one force more relentless than war or disaster, it is nature itself. Time does not sit idle. It works quietly, steadily, with tools sharper than any blade, wind, water, ice, and the patient creep of roots through stone. Over 100,000 years, these forces are not background noise. They are architects, sculptors, and executioners reshaping the face of the earth until all human traces are swept away. Erosion is among the oldest of these assassins. Each gust of wind carries grains of sand that scrape rock like invisible knives. Over centuries, the sharp edges of a carved statue blur. Over millennia, its features vanish entirely. Rain seeps into cracks, freezing and expanding, prying stone apart. A mountain can be worn to rubble this way. What chance would a wall, a road, or a temple have rivers carve valleys and sweep soil into the sea? Floodplains bury old settlements under meters of silt, sealing them away until even the memory of them is gone. Entire cities can disappear beneath new landscapes, the way Troy lay hidden beneath layers of earth for centuries before chance rediscovery. Multiply that concealment by 100,000 years, and the odds of recovery dwindle close to zero. Then there is ice, slow, grinding, merciless. Glaciers advance like titans across the land, scraping bedrock clean. They drag stones the size of houses, pulverizing everything in their path into gravel and dust. A village, a city, even a monument of towering stone would be ground flat beneath their weight, scattered so thoroughly that nothing recognizable would remain. Vegetation, too, is a destroyer in disguise. Roots work their way into the tiniest cracks of stone, forcing them apart. Trees topple walls, vines strangle columns, forests reclaim what was once cleared. What we imagine as eternal ruins are in fact only brief stages in a cycle of reclamation. Angkor Wat in Cambodia, swallowed by jungle in just a few hundred years, is a reminder of how quickly nature takes back her own. And always there is time. Time wears down even what seems immovable. An inscription carved into stone can endure for thousands of years, but after tens of thousands, letters fade until they are meaningless scratches. After 100,000, even the scratches vanish, the stone weathered, smooth, indistinguishable from any natural boulder. The landscapes we walk upon today are not the same ones that existed 100 millennia ago. Coastlines have shifted, rivers have changed course, forests have grown and died, deserts have moved like tides. The world itself erases and redraws its maps. To expect fragile human works to withstand such transformation is to underestimate the power of the earth. This is why silence in the archaeological record should never be mistaken for proof of nothingness. Nature is the great eraser, and over spans of deep time it leaves behind little more than whispers. The geological shuffle. If erosion and weather are the patient brushstrokes of time, then geology is the hand that lifts the canvas and starts again. Beneath our feet the earth is never still. Its crust is broken into colossal plates drifting on molten rock, colliding, splitting and grinding past one another in a slow-motion dance. Over spans of tens of thousands of years, this tectonic shuffle reshapes entire continents, burying and erasing everything caught in its path. Consider earthquakes. In a single moment, the ground can split, swallow and shatter. Cities built in seismic zones today have collapsed in seconds from tremors lasting less than a minute. Now extend that violence across 100 millennia. Thousands of earthquakes each, tearing at foundations, reducing walls to rubble, shifting the very terrain so that what was once a valley becomes a hill, and what was once a settlement becomes indistinguishable from natural debris. Volcanoes too are great obliterators. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE, it buried Pompeii in ash within hours, freezing the city in time. Yet what preserved Pompeii in the short term would eventually destroy it in the long term. Ash hardens, crushes and locks ruins under layers that are ground away by rain and wind over centuries. Multiply that by dozens of eruptions across the globe far larger than Vesuvius, and imagine how entire regions could vanish beneath lava flows, or be blanketed in pyroclastic fury. Mountain building is another ruthless force. When two plates collide, land buckles upward, birthing peaks that scrape the sky. The Himalayas, rising from the collision of India with Asia, still climb higher each year. Anything that once existed at the collision point is long gone, crumpled and buried miles deep within the mountains. Human hands could never preserve what the earth itself folds, crushes and transforms into stone. And then there is subduction, the most final of fates. Along certain boundaries, one tectonic plate slides beneath another, dragging entire landscapes down into the mantle. Whatever lies on that sinking crust where the forests, rivers or cities disappears forever, recycled into molten rock. It is not just destruction, it is annihilation, as if the page itself has been torn from history and thrown into the fire. This geological churn is invisible in our short lives, but across deep time it is merciless. 100,000 years is enough for rivers to change course, for coasts to be swallowed, for new volcanoes to rise and collapse again, for fault lines to shift entire regions. The surface of the earth is not permanent, it is rewritten again and again. If a civilization had risen in that distant past, much of it may already lie crushed beneath mountains, swallowed by the sea, or melted into the mantle itself. To expect its ruins to endure unscathed is to forget that our planet does not keep archives. It recycles them. Ice and ocean as forces of oblivion. If you want to understand how fragile human traces truly are, you need only look at two of Earth's oldest sculptors, ice and sea. Together they have rewritten the planet's surface again and again, not in centuries, but across the sweeping canvas of millennia. Glaciers are not delicate rivers of ice, but engines of destruction. Picture a sheet of frozen water miles thick pressing down with the weight of mountains. As it moves, it grinds stone into powder, plucking boulders from the ground and dragging them for miles like toys. Valleys are carved into U-shapes, cliffs scraped bare, forests scoured to nothing. Whatever lies beneath is erased. No city wall, no road, no monument could withstand the patient crushing passage of ice. During the height of the last ice age, vast portions of North America, Northern Europe, and Asia were buried beneath these glaciers. Entire landscapes vanished beneath their weight. And when the ice retreated, it left behind land utterly transformed, smoothed, rearranged, and littered with rubble. If human works had stood there 100,000 years ago, they would have been reduced to gravel indistinguishable from the natural ground. And then there is the sea. If ice is the bulldozer, water is the thief that swallows whole worlds. During the Ice Age, so much water was locked in glaciers that sea levels were over 100 meters lower than today. This meant coastlines stretched far beyond where they are now. Wide plains, fertile deltas and coastal valleys, the very places where humans love to settle, were dry land. But when the ice melted, the oceans rose. Slowly, steadily, those plains drowned. Doggerland, a vast landscape that once connected Britain to Europe, is now hidden beneath the North Sea. Beringia, the land bridge between Siberia and Alaska, is buried beneath frigid waters. Entire continents like Sahul shrank as seas swallowed their edges. The scale of what was lost is staggering. Some estimates suggest more than 20 million square kilometers of land disappeared beneath the waves at the end of the Ice Age. Imagine the cities of today: New York, London, Shanghai, Mumbai. All of them sit on coasts. If our civilization ended now and the seas rose again, those same cities would vanish beneath water, preserved only as ghostly ridges on the seafloor. And here is the chilling thought: if there had been settlements, even advanced ones, on those Ice Age coasts, they too would be gone. Waves scour coastlines, storms batter ruins, sediments bury them in silence. Over 100,000 years, even stone walls would crumble into rubble washed into the deep. Ice scrapes, oceans swallow. Together they are forces of oblivion, ensuring that whatever came before is hidden, erased, or locked away where we have yet to look. The problem of scale. When we imagine archaeology, we picture explorers brushing dust from pottery shards or lifting a golden mask from a tomb. The truth is more humble. Most archaeological digs stretch down only a few meters into the earth, layers representing the last few thousand years at most. That is where the richest finds are, and where history as we know it already promises discoveries. But what about the deeper layers, the ones buried not by centuries but by ice ages, floods, and entire geological eras? The problem is scale. To reach the time of 100,000 years ago, you would need to dig not just through layers of soil, but through strata laid down by floods, volcanic eruptions, and shifting rivers. In some regions, that means tens of meters of sediment compacted into stone hardened by time. Excavating that depth is not only difficult, it is enormously expensive and often dangerous. For archaeologists limited by funding and guided by what they expect to find, and there is little incentive to dig so deep unless something extraordinary already points the way. Most archaeology is also targeted. Researchers focus on places where prior evidence suggests human activities and ancient cities' burial grounds or landscapes mentioned in texts. But 100,000 years ago, there were no written records to guide us. Any settlements from that age, if they existed, are invisible on maps erased from memory and hidden beneath layers no one thinks to search. The silence is self-perpetuating, because mainstream history assumes there was no civilization that far back few are willing to look for one, and because few look, none is found. Add to this the sheer immensity of the planet. Only a fraction of the Earth's surface has ever been systematically studied. Vast forests, deserts and seafloors remain untouched by archaeologists' spades. Even in well-explored regions, most excavations skim the surface, stopping after uncovering the layers relevant to known history. Beneath them may lie deeper stories, but the spades never reach that far. In this way, the problem of scale is not just physical, but philosophical. We tell ourselves history begins at a certain point, and so we focus on that horizon. Everything earlier is dismissed as prehistory, a foggy era defined more by absence than presence. But absence can be misleading. Beneath the feet of farmers, under the floors of cities, and far below the reach of ordinary digs, the deeper layers remain untouched, waiting perhaps with secrets we no longer believe possible. Hidden places where traces could survive. If most of the earth is a restless slate constantly erasing and rewriting itself, then where could fragments of the past still linger? If a civilization existed 100,000 years ago, where might we still have a chance to find its fingerprints? The answer lies not in open plains or river valleys, but in hidden places. Natural vaults where the hand of time moves more slowly. Caves are one such refuge. Across the world, caves have preserved the fragile. Charcoal handprints, ochre-painted animals, even the delicate remains of flowers left on Neanderthal graves have survived tens of thousands of years underground. Shielded from rainwind and sunlight, caves act like stone safes locking away what would otherwise rot. If a lost society had left carving pigments or even storage chambers within caves, some echoes of them might still remain waiting in the dark. Permafrost offers another chance. In the frozen soils of Siberia and Alaska, entire mammoths have been found with flesh and hair intact, preserved for tens of thousands of years. If organic objects or even structures were abandoned in such frozen ground, they could still lie beneath the ice, protected from decay. Vast regions of the Arctic remain unexplored beneath their frozen cover, holding secrets time has not yet thawed. And what of the ice sheets themselves? Beneath Greenland and Antarctica lie landscapes untouched for hundreds of thousands of years. Some scientists suspect rivers and mountains hide below the ice. If humans once walked those lands before they froze, their traces might still be sealed beneath kilometers of ice, as perfectly entombed as Pompeii, but on a far greater scale. The challenge, of course, is access. Drilling through such immense ice layers is daunting, but the possibility cannot be dismissed. Beneath the oceans, another world of possibility waits. During the last ice age, sea levels were more than 100 meters lower, exposing continental subtle shelves where fertile plains and coastal deltas stretched for miles. These were the kinds of places humans have always favored, rich in food, fresh water and temperate climates. When the seas rose, those landscapes drowned. Today they are hidden beneath waves and layers of marine sediment shielded from the scouring winds of the surface. If ancient settlements existed there, they may still rest on the seabed, silent but not gone. Even underground vaults, whether natural or carved, could be key. If a people had dug into bedrock to store food tools or knowledge, some fragments could have survived the ages. Already we know that certain ancient mines and cave systems have endured for tens of thousands of years. Could there be chambers we have not yet stumbled upon, filled with clues that survived by sheer luck of location? The open world may have erased its memories, but the hidden world, the frozen, the sunken, the sealed, still holds its secrets tightly. And if there are whispers of another civilization out there, it is in these places that they might be found. A drowned world. The sunken coastlines. At the height of the last ice age, so much water was locked away in glaciers that global sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than today. Imagine the map of the world redrawn, the continents stretched farther, the ocean shrank, and vast plains now hidden beneath the sea were once dry ground where life flourished. When the ice began to melt, the seas rose. Slowly, steadily they advanced, swallowing shorelines, flooding valleys, and drowning entire landscapes. In the space of a few thousand years, millions of square kilometers of habitable land disappeared beneath the waves. If people had lived there, as people almost certainly did, then entire chapters of human life now rest under the ocean. Take Doggerland, once a rich stretch of plains connecting Britain to continental Europe. A place of rivers, forests, and game where Mesolithic peoples hunted, fished, and built their camps. Today it lies beneath the North Sea, lost to fishermen's nets and sonar scans. Archaeologists have dredged up antler tools, bones, and even hints of ancient settlements from its seabed. Doggerland is proof that whole worlds can vanish beneath water and be forgotten for millennia. Farther east was Beringia, the land bridge that once linked Siberia to Alaska. It wasn't just a narrow strip of earth, but an immense windswept grassland that stretched hundreds of miles across. It served as both highway and homeland where mammoth herds grazed and human bands passed between continents. When the seas rose, Beringia sank, cutting off the connection and leaving only the cold Bering Strait in its place. And there were many more: the Sahul Shelf linking Australia to New Guinea and Tasmania, the Sunda Shelf connecting Southeast Asia to the Asian mainland, coastal valleys across every continent now drowned and buried in sediment. These were not marginal lands, but prime real estate, the same kinds of fertile coasts where humanity builds its greatest cities today. If any advanced settlements had stood there in the deep past, they would now lie in darkness under the sea. This perhaps is the greatest blind spot in our search for the past. The ocean floor is vast and difficult to explore. Only a fraction of it has been mapped in detail, and almost none has been excavated for archaeology. We have searched the deserts, the caves and the ruins on land. But the drowned world, the landscape swallowed when the ice retreated, remains largely untouched. And so we stand on the shores of our continents looking out at the sea, unaware that beneath those waves lies not just water, but memory valleys, forests, rivers, and perhaps even echoes of a forgotten civilization waiting beneath the tide. Myths that might remember. Long before archaeology became a science, long before satellites mapped the seafloor, human beings told stories. Around fires in temples across generations, they passed down tales of floods and vanished lands, of golden cities swallowed by the sea of worlds destroyed in a single night. For centuries we called these myths and assumed they were nothing more than imagination. But what if some of them are distorted memories, echoes of real places erased by rising waters and shifting earth? The most famous of these tales is Atlantis. The Greek philosopher Plato wrote of it more than 2,000 years ago, a great island civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules, wealthy, advanced, and proud. In his telling, Atlantis was destroyed in a single day and night of floods and earthquakes, vanishing beneath the sea. Mainstream scholars see Plato's story as allegory, a political parable. Yet its vividness has haunted us ever since. Could it have been more than metaphor, a cultural memory of lands drowned at the end of the Ice Age? The echoes stretch far beyond Greece. Aboriginal peoples of Australia tell stories of coasts that once extended far into the sea, now long drowned. Some of these oral traditions align uncannily with geological events that occurred more than 7,000 years ago, suggesting that memory can indeed outlast millennia. In South Asia, ancient Sanskrit texts describe great kingdoms swallowed by floods. In Mesopotamia, tales of a deluge first in the Epic of Gilgamesh, later retold as Noah's flood, speak of gods or fate sending waters to cover the earth. Across the Americas, native traditions recall times when the land shifted, seas rose, and whole peoples were lost. The remarkable thing is not the differences, but the pattern. Again and again, across cultures separated by oceans, we find stories of the sea rising, of floods that remade the world, of civilizations drowned and forgotten. Is it coincidence? Or is it the lingering scar of the same global event, the great melting of the ice, when seas swallowed millions of square kilometers of land? Of course, myths change over time. A memory of a drowned valley can become a tale of divine punishment. A lost coastline can be retold as a kingdom of shining towers. Yet beneath the embellishments may lie kernels of truth carried forward by memory, even as ruins sank beneath the waves. Perhaps the legends of Atlantis and its kin are not fantasies, but fragment stories passed down by survivors of drowned worlds, echoing faintly across time. And if stories can endure 7,000 years in Aboriginal traditions, might not faint traces of even older catastrophes still linger, hidden inside our oldest myths? Myth is not proof, but myth is memory. And sometimes memory is the last thing that survives. Stories across cultures. If myths are memory wrapped in poetry, then the world's oldest stories are a chorus, distant voices singing the same melody in different languages. Listen closely and you hear the refrain everywhere. Waters rise, worlds drown, a few survive, and humankind begins again. The names change, the mountains change, the gods change. But the rhythm of the tale holds steady, as if it were hammered into the collective mind by an event so large that no single culture could forget it. Begin in Mesopotamia, where baked clay tablets carry the weight of a very old sorrow. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim is warned of a deluge destined to erase humanity. He seals his family and the seed of all living things in a vessel. When the waters finally fall away, he releases birds to test the air. First a dove, then a swallow, and at last a raven that does not return. The world is remade on a muddy shoreline beneath a clearing sky. In that same crescent of rivers, other tablets tell of Atrahasis, another warned man, another boat, another flood. The details shift like ripples, but the shape of the story is the same. Follow the story westward and you arrive at a wooden ark on a mountain crest, a dove with an olive branch caught in its beak, and a covenant marked by a rainbow. In this version too there is a warning, a building, a storm without edges, a long wait over a drowned earth, and then the first careful steps onto new ground. The ancient Near East repeated itself to itself, a memory carried in the language of faith braided with moral meanings, but also echoing the plain terror of water that does not stop rising. Turn the wheel east and the flood becomes a fish. In Sanskrit tradition, a tiny creature Matsya speaks to Manu. Care for me, it seems to say, and Manu does, setting the fish in a pot, then a pond, then the river, and finally the sea as it grows and grows. In return, Matsya warns him the waters will come. Build a vessel, bind it to my horn. When the deluge arrives, Manu's boat follows the godfish through mountains of water to a high peak. It is a story of rescue of a guide through chaos of a world that restarts not with thunder, but with a gentle tether and a patient ascent into safety. From the Indo-Gangetic plains to the Himalayas, the shape of the myth is familiar, a signal, a construction, a flood, a mountain, a new beginning. Cross the Pacific in your mind and the voices of the Americas rise up from cedar forests and desert mesas. Along the northwest coast, some tell of the sea chasing people inland, canoes lashed to the tops of mountains, anchors sunk deep into bedrock to keep them from drifting into oblivion. Farther south and east, the Algonquin and Ojibwe speak of an earth diver tale, the world swamped by water until a muskrat, small and stubborn, brings up a pinch of mud from the depths to rebuild the land on a turtle's back. In the southwest, the Hopi remember worlds destroyed and worlds reborn, with survivors guided through a hollow reed into a new dry earth. The instruments change canoes, chords reads turtles, but the score remains the same: flood, survival, renewal. Travel to the Andes and you meet Viracocha, the maker who walks the drowned world and calls the land to rise. In China, the Great Flood lingers not as a single storm, but as a longer warfare against the water, until the great channels the restless rivers through dikes and canals, taming them into submission. The deluge here is a habit of the earth rather than a single calamity, but the theme holds a memory of too much water, too long, too often. And then there is Australia, whose oldest voices speak in songs that map the land. Along its coasts, Aboriginal traditions remember shorelines that no longer exist. Bays that were once plains, headlands that were once hills, islands once connected to the mainland. In some tellings, heroes name the drowned landmarks. In others, the sea is a living being that pushes its way inland until it is appeased. Across tens of generations, place names travel like heirlooms. What was once walked is now swum. What was once camp is now reef. In these stories, you can almost hear the footfall of those who watched the tide climb year after year and told their children where the beach used to be. What do we make of this skepticism is healthy. Mythology is not a ledger of events. It grows, it shifts, it gathers embellishment. Gods are added morals, attached enemies named miracles, woven into the fabric of remembered earth. Yet beneath the embroidery a pattern persists, the water rises, people flee, a remnant endures, the world resumes. The geographic details are local, but the structure is global. It's hard to ignore how repeatedly the same architecture appears across cultures that never met. If you sit with the pattern, it begins to feel less like coincidence and more like deep cultural memory, a human attempt to compress an era of changing seas into a story short enough to carry by mouth. Imagine parents pointing toward a line of surf and telling children, "There was a time when the land reached farther than you can see." Imagine grandchildren hearing the same line, and then their grandchildren, until the fact bleaches into a fable, but remains stubbornly in place. Imagine navigators singing a coastline that is no longer there, so that the map survives even when the ground it describes is gone. Even the motifs align like constellations, a warning from god, ancestor, or omen, a chosen or prepared survivor, a vessel or refuge animals, as messengers or scouts, a mountaintop, or high ground, the saving of seeds or the essence of life in the repeopling of a cleansed earth. If this were only story, why would its scaffolding be so consistent? If it were only morality play, why fix it so often to geography, this bay, this ridge, that island that is now a sandbar? None of this proves that an advanced civilization lived and drowned on Ice Age coasts. Myth alone cannot carry such a weight, but myth can point like a weathered sign at a crossroads. It can tell us where memories cluster, where people kept insisting that something enormous happened long ago, and that the ocean was the hand that did it. It can whisper, "Look here," search the continental shelves, dive where rivers once ran across plains that are now seafloor. Perhaps we mistake the medium for the message. We hear gods and fish and turtles and assume fantasy, but the message may be simpler: water moved, the world changed. We survived by leaving what we loved and climbing to where the flood could not reach. That is a lesson as practical as any, so practical that it would be taught and retaught for as long as anyone remembered the fear. And if the fear was carved not into stone but into story, then story is what survived. In that sense, the flood narratives are less about punishment than about memory discipline, a way to keep the map in mind to warn the next generation that the coast is a promise, not a guarantee. In our own time, standing on shores crowded with cities, we may be the ones who need those stories most. Reminders that seas are restless and that the line between land and water is a conversation, not a treaty. Across clay tablets and carved totems, across braided reeds and painted bark, across hymn and chant and bedtime tale, humanity keeps returning to the same memory, a horizon that came closer and closer until it was everywhere. Whether allegory or echo, whether gilded by theology or stripped to place names, this is how we held on to a world that was drowning. We put it into a story and carried it forward in our mouths. And that is why the myths matter here, not as proof but as compass, not as history but as the shadow of something historical. If there were worlds that vanished beneath the sea villages, orchards, footpaths, perhaps even experiments that looked like the first sketches of cities, then the last survivors might have kept their memory in the only vault that could not be flooded. A tale told again and again until it became a tradition that outlived the land itself. Out-of-place artifacts. Sometimes it isn't myths that unsettle our tidy view of history, it's objects. Things found in places they should not exist or crafted in ways that seem centuries, even millennia ahead of their time. Archaeologists call them anomalies. Popular writers call them out-of-place artifacts. To skeptics, they are curiosities or mistakes. To dreamers, they are evidence that our past is far stranger than we admit. Take the Antikythera mechanism. Pulled from the wreck of an ancient Greek ship more than 2,000 years old, it first looked like a lump of corroded bronze. But X-rays revealed an astonishing device, gears nested within gears, delicate teeth turning with mathematical precision. It could predict eclipses, track the paths of planets, and model the motions of the heavens. Nothing like it would be built again for more than 1,000 years. For centuries it sat alone, an orphaned machine that whispered the ancients knew more than we believed. But then there are the more controversial cases. In the mines of South Africa, workers reportedly uncovered small metallic spheres embedded in rock layers 3 billion years old. Most geologists insist they are natural formations, products of mineral growth and pressure. Yet their uncanny symmetry, grooved, balanced, and strangely uniform, continues to stir debate. Are they nature's trick or a sign of something made in Illinois? During the 1940s, a miner split open a lump of coal and claimed to find an iron pot inside. Coal forms over millions of years, compacting plant matter into black stone. How could a human artifact have been sealed within? Skeptics dismiss it as contamination. Perhaps the pot had been dropped, then worked its way into a fissure in the coal. But to those who crave mystery, it remains an unsettling riddle. Then there is the so-called London hammer, discovered in Texas in the 1930s. Encased in a concretion of rock, the hammer looks like a tool no older than a few hundred years. Yet the surrounding material is claimed to be many millions of years old. Critics argue the concretion formed more recently around the hammer, a process nature can accomplish under the right conditions. Believers insist the artifact proves our timeline is incomplete. And there are others, carved stones in unexpected layers, nails embedded in rock chains said to have been found in coal. Most are dismissed as misinterpretations, hoaxes, or the result of natural processes mistaken for craftsmanship. Yet the stories persist, retold in whispers and books, each one suggesting that maybe, just maybe, we are missing pieces of the puzzle. What do these artifacts mean? Perhaps nothing more than the human tendency to see pattern where none exists, or perhaps they are warnings not to be so certain of what we think we know. Even when explanations exist, anomalies remind us of the fragility of our story, that a single verified out-of-place artifact could overturn centuries of certainty. And so between the Antikythera mechanism, undeniably real, undeniably advanced, and the stranger disputed finds, we glimpse the same unsettling possibility that human history may not be as neat as the textbooks suggest, and that pieces of another story may already sit in our hands unrecognized for what they truly are. The Antikythera error lesson. Among all the strange and disputed finds, one artifact stands unshaken: the Antikythera mechanism. Pulled from the seabed in 1901, encrusted in coral and rust, it looked like little more than a lump of metal. For decades it sat in silence, an oddity from an ancient shipwreck, catalogued but not understood. Only with the arrival of X-ray imaging did its true nature emerge, and with it a revelation that rattled history itself. Inside that corroded shell lay a machine of astonishing complexity, over 30 bronze gears, some with teeth smaller than a grain of rice turning in concert. It was not a toy. It was a precision device capable of modelling the heavens, predicting eclipses, tracking lunar cycles, charting the wanderings of planets. Its builders were not fumbling with guesswork. They commanded mathematics, astronomy, and metallurgy at a level we had never credited to the ancient world. And then silence. No other mechanism like it survived. No line of invention connecting it to medieval clocks, no steady staircase of progress from Greek gears to modern machines. Instead, it was as if a spark flared in the darkness, brilliant and undeniable, and then was extinguished for over 1,000 years. Only much later did clockmakers of the Middle Ages achieve similar precision. The lesson is sobering. Even in the relatively recent past, just 2,000 years ago, technology could appear flourish in the hands of a few, and then vanish so completely that it seemed impossible until rediscovered. If that can happen in the short span of recorded history, what might have happened in the vast unrecorded gulfs before the Antikythera mechanism reminds us that the timeline of invention is not inevitable. Progress is not a straight line. A tool, an idea, even an entire branch of knowledge can rise and then be lost, swallowed by a war accident or simple neglect. And if this can happen within centuries, then over the course of tens of millennia, the loss could be total. When we hold the Antikythera fragments in our hands, we are not just holding gears, we are holding a warning. History is full of sudden gaps of brilliance that disappears, of knowledge that leaves behind only a whisper. If something like this can slip through the cracks of time in the age of philosophers and empires, how many lights may have flared and died in the deeper dark of prehistory? The Antikythera mechanism is proof of concept, proof that human ingenuity is older, stringier, and less predictable than our textbooks allow. And once you admit that the door opens to a larger question, what else has been lost not just for centuries but for ages? Science enters the debate, the Silurian hypothesis. It is one thing for storytellers or dreamers to imagine lost civilizations. It is another for scientists to take the question seriously. And yet in 2018, two respected researchers did exactly that. Gavin Schmidt, a climate scientist at NASA, and Adam Frank, an astrophysicist at the University of Rochester, published a paper with a provocative title, The Silurian Hypothesis. The name was borrowed playfully from Doctor Who, where reptilian Silurians once ruled the Earth in ancient times. But the question Schmidt and Frank asked was deadly serious. If an industrial civilization had existed on Earth millions of years before humans, how would we know? Their answer was unsettling. Physical artifacts, buildings, machines, even clad to bones would almost certainly be gone. Over such spans of time, geology would erase them all. But the planet itself, they argued, might still carry fingerprints, not in monuments but in chemistry. Today our own civilization is leaving behind unmistakable signals. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere are spiking at a rate unmatched in millions of years. Synthetic compounds from plastics to pesticides are seeping into soils and oceans. Radioactive isotopes from nuclear activity linger in sediments. Even if every skyscraper on Earth crumbled tomorrow, these chemical anomalies would remain buried in the layers of rock and ice. Schmidt and Frank proposed that if a pre-human industrial society had once existed, it too might have left such signatures. Shifts in carbon isotopes, odd spikes of methane, deposits of rare metals or unusual sedimentary markers, any of these could signal that something unnatural happened. In fact, they noted geologists already study events like the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, a sudden global warming event 56 million years ago, where carbon levels soared in ways that still puzzle scientists. Was it purely natural, or could it just possibly be evidence of something more? The authors weren't claiming there was an ancient civilization. They were pointing out a blind spot that our methods of detection are not designed to ask the question. We search for pottery shards and stone walls, but the true markers of civilization may be microscopic chemical, locked in ancient mudstone or ice cores. Without knowing to look, we might never recognize them. The Silurian hypothesis reframes the debate. Instead of asking where are the cities, it asks, what scars does any industrial society leave on a planet? And the sobering conclusion is that such scars exist, and that millions of years from now, future scientists could study the chemical strangeness of our own age and wonder if an intelligent species once lived here. If our civilization can be reduced to chemical whispers in the rock record, then so could any that came before. The question is no longer whether they left ruins we can see, but whether we have the courage to look for the more subtle fingerprints of forgotten worlds, geological fingerprints of civilizations. If buildings crumble and monuments dissolve, what remains? Not the shape of cities, but the chemistry of the earth itself. Civilizations ours included leave fingerprints that no storm or glacier can fully erase. They seep into the ground, settle into the oceans, and harden into rock. They are not ruins to be excavated, but signals to be read, whispers pressed into the geological record. The most obvious marker is carbon. Every time we burn fossil fuels, we release not only carbon dioxide, but a very specific isotopic signature. Ancient plants, long buried, carry lighter isotopes of carbon, and when they are burned, that ratio shifts. Future geologists, millions of years from now, will see the sudden spike of CO2 and its peculiar isotopic fingerprint. They will know that something burned the past to power the present. Greenhouse gas spikes are another enduring clue. Our age has driven CO2 levels higher than at any point in at least the last 800,000 years. Methane too has surged. These gases leave chemical echoes that persist in ice cores and ocean sediments. Even if all machines were to vanish, the breath of our industry will remain trapped in the airless silence of ancient stone. Then there are synthetic compounds, plastics, pesticides, fluorocarbons, molecules that do not exist in nature. Some break down quickly, but others can persist for tens or hundreds of thousands of years, especially when buried. Tiny plastic particles are already being woven into the seafloor and fossilized into new forms of rock. Plastiglomerates, part stone, part polymer, a material that future species may chip out of cliffs and wonder about. Radioactive isotopes add another layer. Nuclear activity scatters unusual isotopes across the globe, some with half-lives long enough to endure for millennia. They form distinct spikes in sediments like timestamps of catastrophe. For any civilization capable of splitting atoms, the evidence would linger far longer than their ruins. Even mining leaves scars. Strip mines and quarries reshape landscapes on a colossal scale. Ore deposits are removed, leaving behind voids and altered mineral layers. Millions of years from now, even if vegetation cloaks the surface, deep core samples would reveal sudden unnatural absences of certain metals, the telltale signs of extraction on an industrial scale. This is why scientists like Gavin Schmidt and Adam Frank suggested we might detect not monuments but anomalies, odd chemistry, unusual isotopic ratios, layers of material that nature alone could not produce. Our planet is a book, and civilizations, whether human or not, write their chapters not in ink, but in the sediments. The unsettling question is this: if we are already leaving such signals, could others have done so before us? Buried in deep layers of rock and mud, could there be chemical fingerprints of a society we have never imagined? And if so, would we recognize them for what they are, or dismiss them as natural quirks, never realizing we were reading the ghost of another civilization's story? Long-lasting fingerprints versus short-lived monuments. When we picture civilization, we imagine monuments, pyramids rising above the desert, the Parthenon gleaming on its hill skyscrapers, stabbing the sky. These are our symbols of endurance, testaments meant to outlast their makers. But time is a ruthless judge. Monuments are not forever. In the contest between stone and chemistry, it is the chemistry that wins. Consider the pyramids of Giza. They are over 4,000 years old, impressive by human standards. Yet their survival is not a guarantee of eternity, but an accident of geology and climate. They endure because they sit in one of the driest deserts on Earth, spared from rain and vegetation. Shift them to a wetter climate, and in a few thousand years they would be little more than eroded mounds indistinguishable from natural hills. Cities fare even worse: concrete cracks, steel rusts, glass shatters. Within a few centuries of abandonment, nature begins her reclamation. Within a few millennia, most urban landscapes would be flattened, buried under soil forests or sand. In 10,000 years, only faint outlines might remain, and in 100,000, almost nothing at all. But the atmosphere, the oceans, the sediments, they remember differently. The gases we release do not crumble like stone. They alter the chemical balance of the air and seas, leaving signatures that can persist for hundreds of thousands of years. The plastics we scatter become microfragments embedded in sand and silt, future fossils of an artificial age. The radioactive isotopes we create seep into the soils, leaving spikes in the geological record that cannot be erased. This is the paradox: the most visible symbols of our greatness are the most fragile. while the invisible byproducts of our existence, the waste, the emissions, the chemical shadows are what endure. Our ruins may vanish, but our fingerprints remain. And so if we seek signs of civilizations older than memory, we must learn this lesson. Do not look for towering stones or forgotten temples. Look for the quiet distortions in the earth itself. For it is not monuments but chemistry that writes the truest history, one that no glacier, no storm, no shifting plate can fully erase. Thinking beyond our own reflection. When we imagine an advanced civilization, we picture ourselves. Cities glittering at night, networks of roads and towers, machines humming lights, burning power grids stretching across continents. But what if this is only one way among many? What if our definition of civilization is not universal but a mirror one that blinds us to other possibilities? We measure advancement by skyscrapers and steel, but another society might have turned elsewhere. Imagine a culture that mastered organic technology, growing tools instead of forging them, weaving shelters out of engineered plants, designing living machines from bone fiber and cellulose. Every artifact would decay gracefully back into the soil, leaving almost nothing for archaeologists to find. To us, the absence of ruins would look like absence of civilization, but to them, it might have been the pinnacle of sustainability. Or picture a network of small, self-sufficient communities connected not by sprawling empires, but by knowledge. No megacities, no industrial sprawl, just clusters of people with advanced understanding of medicine, astronomy, and ecology, passing information through memory song or coded rituals. Their genius might have been invisible to geology because it left no scars. Their science might have been precise enough to survive without smoke, soot, or chemical fingerprints. In our search for factories and mines, we would walk right past them blind to the possibility that wisdom itself was their monument. Even their energy could have been different. While we scar the planet with fossil fuels and nuclear waste, they might have tapped clean, subtle sources, geothermal vents, tidal rhythms, engineered organisms. If so, they would have left behind little more than a changed ecosystem, easily mistaken for nature itself. The bias is ours. We assume technology must mean stone towers or metal machines, but perhaps the truest test of advancement is endurance, whether a civilization can thrive without destroying the world that sustains it. By that measure, a society that left no mark may have been more advanced than ours, not less. And so the question becomes, are we failing to find traces of forgotten civilizations, not because they never existed, but because we are only searching for our own reflection? Advancement without cities. When we think of progress, we imagine cities. Tall towers, crowded streets, monuments rising from stone. Civilization, we tell ourselves, is inseparable from urban life. Yet what if that assumption blinds us? What if the highest forms of advancement did not build cities at all? Consider a society that chose movement over permanence. Nomadic by design, but not simple. They could have been masters of biology, medicine, and genetics, carrying knowledge instead of monuments. Their power might not have been in stone walls, but in the invisible sciences of the body and the earth. Imagine healers who could regrow tissue, farmers who could engineer plants to resist climate extremes, wanderers who could guide migrations with astronomical precision. Knowledge itself would have been their architecture, portable, renewable, alive. Such a society would leave little for us to find. Without sprawling cities or quarries, their material footprint would vanish within centuries. Camps would decay into soil-woven dwellings, would rot into the earth. Tools crafted from bone fiber or engineered organics would disappear as if they had never been. Archaeologists today would see only scattered stone fragments and assume primitiveness, while the real brilliance, their science, their mastery of ecosystems, would have been written not in stone but in living systems now long gone. And what of their scale? We assume advancement means growth, more people, bigger populations, expanding empires. But perhaps they chose differently. A decentralized world of small groups, each self-sufficient, each linked through networks of ritual trade and knowledge exchange. Their resilience would not depend on monuments, but on adaptability. If one band disappeared, others endured, carrying the shared memory forward. It is humbling to imagine that civilization might not have meant skyscrapers, armies, or pyramids. It could have meant harmony with nature, mastery of subtle sciences, and a way of life so lightly imprinted on the land that it vanished without trace. If such a society ever existed, then perhaps our failure to find it says less about them and more about us. We are digging for ruins of stone when the real treasure may have been wisdom carried in bloodline stories and seeds, gifts that dissolve into the earth the moment their caretakers are gone. Technologies that vanish without trace. When we think of technology, we imagine metal, steel beams, copper wires, silicon chips, durable, heavy, and obvious. But what if another civilization chose a different path? What if their genius was not in permanence, but in impermanence, in materials that served perfectly while alive and then dissolved back into nature without a scar? Picture a world built from biodegradable composites stronger than steel, yet designed to crumble into soil within a century of disuse. Plant-based polymers shaped into tools, vessels, even machines, each engineered to self-destruct when abandoned. To their makers, this would be progress, a world where nothing became waste, where technology was as natural as leaf litter falling into a forest floor. To us, it would mean vanishing. After 10,000 years, nothing would remain but fertile ground. Imagine energy not chained to smoke and fire, but flowing quietly from earth and sun, geothermal vents tapped by subtle systems that left no pollution. Solar collectors grown from engineered plants, their broad leaves converting light with far greater efficiency than our panels today. Or perhaps they harnessed biological energy, directly designing symbiotic organisms that produced power, light, or heat on command. Such systems would be elegant, sustainable, and utterly invisible after centuries. No ruins, no ash, no slag heaps, only the restored balance of an ecosystem. Even their communication might have left no wires, no towers, no satellites. What if they used biological networks, plants, fungi, even neural interfaces to share information? Knowledge passed invisibly through living conduits, faster than speech, yet leaving nothing to fossilize in stone. If we uncovered the remnants of such systems today, we might mistake them for natural anomalies, odd growth patterns in trees, unusual chemical residues in soil, forgotten mutations with no clear source. Our mistake is to assume that advanced technology must resemble ours, hard, shiny, and resistant to decay. But permanence is not the only measure of sophistication. Perhaps their technology was designed to vanish, not endure. Perhaps survival for them meant blending so seamlessly with nature that, when they were gone, the earth could close over their traces as if they had never been. If so, then the greatest inventions of a forgotten civilization may already be gone. Not because they never existed, but because they worked too well. They left the world, whole, unscarred and silent, as if no hand had ever shaped it. Invisible infrastructures. When we think of infrastructure, we imagine what we can see. Roads ribboning across the land bridges, straddling rivers, airports buzzing with planes, railways etched into stone and soil. Civilization to our eyes is heavy and permanent. But what if another society's networks were invisible, woven not in stone or steel, but in systems so subtle they would look to us like nature itself? Imagine communication, not by wires or satellites, but through biology. Vast fungal networks already lace our forests, transmitting chemical signals between trees in what ecologists call the wood wide web. What if a civilization learned to harness such systems, deliberately cultivating them into sprawling information networks? To us, they would look like root systems, moss or fungal mats. To them, they could have been the equivalent of telegraphs or fiber optic cables, humming with meaning just beneath the soil. Or consider quantum systems, ephemeral and elusive. We are only beginning to glimpse the possibilities of quantum communication entanglement and instant transfer of information. What if others had already mastered it, and not with hulking machines, but with techniques woven into natural processes? Their messages might have left no permanent trace at all, vanishing into the silence of physics once the system was abandoned. Even transport might have been nothing like ours. Our world scars itself with highways, harbours and rails, but a different society could have moved along the sea in organic craft vessels, grown rather than built, designed to glide silently, then decay when no longer needed. No wrecks, no rusted engines, just fragments that dissolve into plankton and silt. On land, perhaps they harnessed animals engineered for endurance or precision, leaving behind only bones indistinguishable from their wild cousins. Or they may have built no permanent paths at all, navigating with knowledge of stars, tides, and subtle landmarks lost to us now. To archaeologists, such a world would look barren. No stone highways, no harbours carved into cliffs, no ruts of wheels fossilized in rock. The only evidence might be patterns mistaken for natural growth, subtle chemical signatures in soil, or anomalous mutations in plants and fungi. In other words, evidence so easily dismissed that we may already have walked past it countless times. We assume infrastructure must be monumental, visible, and enduring. But perhaps the truest sophistication lies in the opposite, in weaving a civilization into the fabric of the earth so completely that when it vanishes, only nature remains. The possibility of deliberate sustainability. When we measure civilization, we measure scars. We point to quarries gouged into mountains, forests leveled for farmland, rivers dammed and redirected, and we say here is progress. But what if that's only our version of the story? What if true advancement did not mean leaving wounds in the earth, but leaving almost nothing at all? It is tempting to imagine that any society capable of reaching our level of knowledge must look like us: factories, mines, concrete and waste. But perhaps a wiser people saw those as signs of failure, not success. Perhaps they defined progress as living in such balance with the world that they could thrive without transforming it into ruin. Consider energy. We burn fuel-split atoms and scatter chemical byproducts across land and sea. Yet another path might have been clean from the beginning. A society might have drawn power from tides, winds, and geothermal vents without overuse, or engineered biological systems that generated energy seamlessly, like leaves taking in sunlight. No soot, no nuclear scars, just the quiet hum of a planet in equilibrium. Consider materials. Where we dig into the crust for metal and oil, they might have grown what they needed: advanced composites made from plant fibers, shells, or bone-like polymers that biodegraded within decades. Their homes and tools would return to the soil almost as quickly as they were made. 10,000 years later, no archaeologist would find a ruin. They would find a forest. Even their food systems could have left no trace. Instead of ploughing fields and breeding vast herds that reshape landscapes, perhaps they cultivated small, efficient and regenerative ecosystems, gardens that looked like wild meadows, orchards that looked like forests, rivers teeming with carefully stewarded fish. Their mastery would be invisible to us because it would look like nature itself. It is possible, even unlikely, that we would fail to recognize such a civilization if it ever existed. We are trained to search for scars, mines, ruins, monumental stones. But what if the truest mark of wisdom was to leave no mark at all? Perhaps in the deepest irony of history, the most advanced societies are the ones we cannot find, not because they never existed, but because they refused to wound the earth to prove they were here. Their legacy would not be carved in stone, but carried in balance, a lesson that we, with all our monuments and scars, may be least prepared to understand. Why they might have vanished nature's wrath. Even the most careful balance with the earth cannot shield against the planet's own moods. If an advanced civilization did exist long before our written history, one explanation for their disappearance may be simple: nature's wrath. The earth is beautiful, but it is never still. Climate has always shifted violently. During the last ice age, global temperatures swung up and down in sharp jolts. A single cold snap could last centuries. Glaciers advanced like walls of living stone, grinding forests into dust, reshaping continents. For people dependent on stable harvests, those shifts would be ruinous. Seas rose and fell by more than 100 meters, swallowing coasts and exposing vast plains. What is now the English Channel was once dry land. Beringia linked Siberia and Alaska. Doggerland sprawled where the North Sea lies today. A people rooted to those landscapes would have seen their heartlands drowned in a single human lifetime. Volcanoes too could erase more than Sibi's cities. Around 74,000 years ago, the Toba supereruption in present-day Indonesia spewed ash across the globe. It may have reduced human populations to a fraction of their size, perhaps only a few thousand breeding pairs. The skies darkened, the sun grew weak, and the world chilled in volcanic winter. If any flourishing society had lived in that age, its fields, roads, and even its memory might have been smothered in ash. Then there are asteroids. The scar of Chicxulub in Mexico reminds us of how fragile life can be. One impact 66 million years ago ended the reign of the dinosaurs. Smaller strikes have occurred since, each one capable of regional devastation. A single rock from the heavens could ignite global fires, trigger tsunamis, and drape the atmosphere in dust thick enough to collapse food chains. For a civilization clustered near coasts or rivers, it could mean obliteration overnight. Even without fire from the sky, the earth itself is restless. Earthquakes fracture mountains, tsunamis erase shorelines, hurricanes flatten forests. A society that endured for centuries might vanish in a single week of chaos. Its monuments toppled, its people scattered, its memory lost in the roar of wind and water. We like to think survival depends only on intelligence. But intelligence is no shield against an angry planet. If a forgotten civilization once walked the earth, it may have fallen not because of its own folly, but because the world beneath its feet shifted too quickly, too violently for even wisdom to withstand why they might have vanished. Human frailty. If nature is a relentless enemy, human beings can be their own undoing. Civilizations are not only threatened by storms, eruptions, or asteroids, they are fragile machines held together by trust, cooperation, and balance. Once those threads unravel, collapse can come swiftly even for the most advanced. War is the most obvious destroyer. A society that mastered weapons would also risk mastering its own destruction. We know this from our own age. In less than a century, humanity went from swords to nuclear fire. If an ancient people harnessed their own devastating technology, a single conflict could have erased generations of progress. Their cities, their networks, even their knowledge could vanish in smoke, their wholly for scattering into simpler ways of life, too few and too traumatized to carry the flame forward. But war is only one form of frailty. Overexploitation may be even deadlier. We are already learning how fragile ecosystems can be when pushed too far. Forests vanish, soils exhaust, waters turn bitter. If another civilization once grew too large, too hungry, too blind to its limits, it might have devoured the very resources that sustained it. The collapse would come not in a single day, but in a slow starvation, a hollowing out of abundance until only ruin remained. Trade and agriculture. The veins and arteries of any society are especially vulnerable. When one link fails, when crops die or trade routes fracture, the shock cascades. Food shortages spark unrest. Unrest sparks violence. Institutions falter. We see echoes of this in Rome's long decline, in the fall of the Mayan kingdoms, and countless ancient collapses. Scale does not guarantee safety. If anything, the bigger and more intricate the web, the easier it is to tear. And then there is the fragility of memory. Knowledge must be preserved, taught, and handed down. If libraries are burned, teachers slain, or scripts lost, wisdom dies quietly in the dark. A people who knew astronomy, medicine, even genetics could see it slip away within a handful of generations if chaos stripped away the means to pass it on. Their descendants might inherit only fragments, songs, symbols, or half-remembered myths, echoes of a greatness they no longer understood. The sobering truth is this intelligence does not guarantee survival. Progress can build tools of war as easily as cures. Trade networks can feed millions or collapse into famine. Agriculture can sustain life or exhaust the soil until nothing grows. A civilization, no matter how advanced, is not a fortress, but a balancing act. And when it falls, the fall can be total. If such a society once lived 100,000 years ago, it may have ended. Not with fire from the sky or ash from the earth, but with its own frailty, a slow unraveling of trust, stability, and memory, until all that was left were scattered bands who remembered only that once long ago there had been something greater. The slow fade into oblivion. Not every ending is fire and ash. Some are whispers. Civilizations do not always collapse in a single night of catastrophe. Sometimes they dissolve slowly, so quietly that the world scarcely notices. A society can vanish not because it was destroyed, but because it was forgotten. Imagine an advanced culture living 100,000 years ago. For centuries it thrives, its knowledge secure, its communities strong. But then the tides of change begin. Climate shifts, resources dwindle, populations scatter. Perhaps there is no war, no cataclysm, just a steady unraveling of what once held them together. Over generations, skills that once defined them fade. A healer's art is not passed down to apprentices. A method of agriculture becomes unnecessary when migrations scatter the fields. Songs that once encoded knowledge lose their meaning as languages shift. Within a few centuries, the brilliance of a people is reduced to fragments, half-remembered tales, rituals stripped of their original purpose, tools replaced by simpler ones that can be made more easily. Assimilation can complete the erasure. Survivors merging with other human groups might carry fragments of knowledge, but without context, those fragments become curiosities. A story of the stars becomes myth. A remedy for disease becomes a folk charm. Over time, even those traces fade, absorbed into the broader current of human life until no one remembers where they began. The slow fade is insidious precisely because it leaves so little to mark its passing. There are no ruins toppled by fire, no layers of ash to excavate. Instead, the society melts into the background of human history, its uniqueness dissolved into the collective flow. What remains are echoes so faint we mistake them for ordinary myth, custom, or coincidence. This possibility may be the most sobering of all, because it means that even if a civilization did exist before our own, it might not have fallen in glory or violence. It may simply have slipped away its identity, forgotten its knowledge, lost its people, blending into the tide of humanity until they were indistinguishable from everyone else. In that case, their greatest monuments are not buried in stone or steel. They are buried in silence in the absence of memory, and sometimes silence is the most final grave of all. The time gap problem. 100,000 years. It is a phrase we say easily, but the scale of it lies beyond our grasp. Our oldest written records are barely 5,000 years old. Our oldest surviving architecture perhaps 10 or 12,000. Even oral traditions carefully preserved rarely stretch beyond a few thousand years before they fragment into myth. What then survives 100 millennia? Almost nothing. This is the time gap problem, the simple fact that time itself is merciless. A single event, a single civilization, even one that thrived for centuries, can vanish into silence long before 100,000 years have passed. Oral memory is the first to go. Stories carried from one generation to the next mutate within a few centuries. A great flood becomes a divine punishment. A real city becomes a mythical kingdom. After 10 generations, detail blurs. After 100, only fragments remain. Without writing, even the most important histories dissolve into legend and then into nothing at all. Physical traces are no stronger. Wood rots, cloth frays, bone turns to dust. Metals corrode into nothing more than stains in the soil. Even stone, our most durable medium, crumbles under frost rain and roots. In 1,000 years, a city becomes rubble. In 10,000, a forest grows where towers once stood. In 100,000, the forest itself may be gone, replaced by a deserted ocean or glacier. Context, too, is fragile. Archaeology depends not only on finding artifacts, but on understanding them in relation to their world. A single object without context can be dismissed as accident, misplacement, or natural oddity. Without entire sites preserved, the meaning of artifacts is erased. A fragment of engineered material might be found one day, but without a cultural web to anchor it, we would never know it was once the work of a lost people. This is why the time gap is so formidable. It is not just that traces vanish, it is that the very possibility of remembering vanishes. Stories fade, ruins crumble, context is lost until all that remains is silence. And in that silence we convince ourselves nothing ever existed. The truth is simpler and harsher. 100,000 years is more than enough time to erase almost anything, which means that even if entire civilizations once walked this earth, they could have been swallowed whole by time, leaving us nothing but questions and an empty page where their story should have been. How catastrophe resets humanity. Civilizations look permanent while they stand cities blazing with light, trade routes binding continents, knowledge written in books and stored in vaults. But permanence is an illusion. History has shown how fragile complex systems can be, and how quickly collapse follows when those systems are broken. Imagine then a single catastrophic event, not a slow decline, but a sudden blow that severs every thread at once. Perhaps it is a massive volcanic eruption. Ash blots out the sun, temperatures plummet, crops wither. Within months, famine spreads, within years, populations collapse. Or an asteroid impact igniting global fires and shaking the earth with waves taller than mountains. Or a global war in which weapons of terrible power erase not only cities, but the capacity to rebuild them. In every version, the result is the same survivors left with nothing but the barest means to endure. They no longer worry about astronomy, engineering, or medicine. They worry about firewater and food. The libraries are ash. The laboratories are rubble. The trade networks that once brought grain and salt across continents are gone. Within a single lifetime, the survivors may remember fragments, stories of machines that once flew, medicines that once cured. Within a few generations, those memories degrade into myths. A child might hear their grandmother speak of towers of glass, but in their world of forests and caves, such visions make no sense. By the 5th or 10th generation, the story has become legend. Once the sky was filled with fire and the gods walked in shining halls, and then the forgetting is complete. Without tools to preserve knowledge, without the means to practice and maintain it, the past is swallowed by necessity. Survival erases memory. This is how catastrophe resets humanity. It doesn't just destroy cities, it destroys continuity. Civilization is a delicate web of memory, skill, and infrastructure. Sever that web, and the descent is swift. In less than a century, the inheritors of an advanced world could be living like their distant ancestors, hunting-gathering, starting over. And if that happened 100,000 years ago, what would we see today? Nothing but silence. The catastrophe would have wiped the slate clean, and time would have finished the erasure. We would never know that anything had been there at all. Genetic echoes of the forgotten. Sometimes the only survivors of a people are not their monuments, their tools, or even their stories, but their blood. Modern genetics has revealed that our species is not a solitary branch on the tree of humanity, but a braided river with streams converging and fading. Neanderthals once walked the caves of Europe, Denisovans inhabited the high plateaus of Asia, and both left traces still carried in the bodies of living humans today. Most of us outside Africa carry 1 to 2% Neanderthaldom. Populations in Melanesia and parts of Asia carry even more fragments of Denisovan ancestry. These are not visible legacies, no city walls or sculptures, but quiet inheritances of physiology and resilience genes for immune systems, for adapting to cold, even for surviving thin mountain air. The people themselves are gone, their cultures erased by time, yet their shadows walk with us in every heartbeat. It raises a haunting question: if we unknowingly carry Neanderthal and Denisovan fragments, could we also carry echoes of another more mysterious lineage? One that was not only human, but perhaps deeply advanced. If a civilization flourished 100,000 years ago, and if even a few of its members survived catastrophe, their genes could have blended into ours. Their knowledge might have been lost, but their biology endured. Such fragments would be nearly invisible, scattered thinly across billions of people, broken into shards too small to recognize. But they would be their quiet testimony to lives lived, choices made, and perhaps achievements far greater than we imagine. We may walk today with the genetic embers of forgotten worlds glowing inside us, unaware that our very bodies are carrying the last surviving trace of civilizations erased from memory. In this way, humanity itself may be the living monument of the lost our genomes, a graveyard of ancient companions, and perhaps of ancient greatness too. The limits of DNA as history. If stone crumbles and memory fades, DNA sometimes endures. It is tempting to think of our genome as a book of history, a record of every people who ever lived. And in some ways it is. Modern science has shown us the echoes of ancient encounters hidden in our blood. Neanderthal fragments in Eurasian populations. Denisovan genes in Melanesians, traces of lost hominins that no fossil has ever revealed. DNA is a time capsule carried forward by the living when all else is gone, but it is not a history book in the way we long for. Genes tell us who met, who mingled, who survived, but not what they built, what they dreamed, or how they lived. A genetic marker might prove that an unknown population once walked the earth, but it cannot tell us if they were foragers or farmers, healers or architects, builders of firelight camps or of forgotten cities. DNA carries survival, not achievement. It tells us that someone was here but not who they were. The genome cannot record the intricacy of a language, the architecture of a temple, the structure of a government, or the spark of an idea. A brilliant civilization could vanish completely, leaving behind only a handful of descendants who absorbed their genes but none of their culture. To us they would appear as just another small band of ancient humans, their greatness invisible. There is another problem: dilution. Over tens of thousands of years, genetic legacies are broken apart, scattered across billions of people, until they are fragments indistinguishable from the noise of random variation. The further back you go, the harder it is to separate the signal from the static. A population that once reshaped its world might survive in us only as a faint echo, detectable only with the most sophisticated tools, and even then stripped of meaning. So DNA is both a gift and a frustration. It proves survival where all else has been erased, but it cannot resurrect a lost society's story. If an advanced civilization lived 100,000 years ago, their blood may still flow in our veins, but if their monuments are gone, their language forgotten, and their memory dissolved into myth, they alone will never tell us what they achieved. The record of their lives would remain unwritten, not in stone, not in genes, but only in the silence that time preserves so well. What if we found proof today? Imagine it. A discovery so undeniable it shatters the neat timeline we've written for ourselves. A vault unearthed beneath the ice of Greenland, a fossilized machine dredged from a drowned plane, or a layer of rock containing compounds no natural process could explain. In one instant, the world would know an advanced civilization lived here before us. The shockwaves would ripple everywhere. In history, textbooks would collapse overnight. The story we teach that civilization began in Mesopotamia and Egypt would suddenly be exposed as a fragment, not a beginning. Archaeologists would rush to re-examine forgotten anomalies, those unexplained finds once dismissed. 1,000 questions would explode. Who were they? How long did they last? What did they achieve? And most urgently, why did they vanish? Science would reel. Anthropologists and geneticists would be forced to rethink human evolution. If these people were Homo sapiens, it would mean our species reached the heights of knowledge far earlier than believed. If they were another hominin Neanderthals, Denisovans, or something unknown, it would prove intelligence is not unique to us, but a recurring spark the Earth itself nurtures. Geologists would scour sediments for new clues, climatologists would study how nature reset itself after their fall, and futurists would ask, the most frightening question: could the same fate await us? Religion would feel the tremors too. For faiths that root humanity's story in a clear beginning, proof of a forgotten civilization, would raise profound questions. Some traditions would resist, others would adapt, weaving the discovery into their understanding of creation and fall. Myths once dismissed as allegory. Atlantis, floods, golden ages might suddenly be re-examined as distorted memories of real events. Politics would ignite. Nations would compete to claim the discovery, to control access to artifacts, to own the narrative. If technology or knowledge were recoverable, the stakes would be higher still, not just history, but power. Who interprets the evidence? Who decides its meaning? Who keeps and who shares the inheritance of a civilization older than history? And culture, our collective imagination, would be transformed. The sense of uniqueness that defines us would fracture. We would no longer be the first civilization, but the latest. Our monuments would feel smaller, our permanence more fragile. Yet at the same time, awe would spread. We would see ourselves not as the culmination, but as part of a vast hidden cycle, civilizations rising and falling across the ages, each writing its brief chapter in the Earth's endless book. Such proof would humble us, frighten us, and inspire us. It would remind us that greatness does not guarantee survival, and that even our brightest age could be buried, forgotten, and replaced. In the mirror of their memory, we might see not only who they were, but who we could become if we choose differently. How it would change our self-image. We like to believe we stand at the pinnacle of time. Our skyscrapers pierce the sky, our machines orbit the Earth, our networks wrap the globe in invisible threads of information. We call ourselves the first truly advanced civilization, the unique peak of history. But proof of another long buried and forgotten would shatter that illusion in an instant. Suddenly we would see ourselves not as the inevitable culmination of progress, but as one chapter in a much older book, a cycle of rise and fall written not once but many times. Our triumphs, science, medicine, art, space travel would feel less like singular miracles and more like echoes repeating patterns that may have unfolded before. It is a humbling thought. We are not unique. Not the first to dream of mastery, not the first to shape the Earth with intelligence and ambition. We are simply the most recent. The idea unsettles us because it erodes our faith in permanence. We like to think progress is irreversible, that once knowledge is gained, it cannot be lost. But history proves otherwise. The Antikythera mechanism vanished from memory for 2 millennia. Roman concrete was forgotten for centuries. Libraries burned, languages died, and entire systems of knowledge dissolved into dust. If civilizations before us could climb to heights and then fall, what guarantees that ours will not? It forces us to reconsider what advancement really means. Is it measured in monuments and machines, or in endurance? A civilization that lived in harmony and left no scars might outlast us in wisdom, if not in ruins. If they too fell, then perhaps the measure of progress is not just what we achieve, but what we manage to preserve. The discovery would cast a shadow over our self-image, but also light a flame of perspective. We would be humbled, yes, but also reminded that intelligence is not a gift unique to one age. It may be part of Earth's nature itself, a pattern that emerges again and again, flares brightly and then fades. And in that realization lies both fear and possibility. Fear that we too will be forgotten. Possibility that our story is not the end, but one verse in a song far older and longer than we ever imagined. The danger of our blindness. We hear it often: there is no evidence of an advanced civilization 100,000 years ago, no ruins, no artifacts, no machines. But what we rarely stop to ask is, where have we truly looked? The absence of discovery is not proof of absence. It is often proof of our own blindness. Most archaeology takes place in narrow bands, shallow layers of soil caves, where artifacts are likely to survive ruins, hinted at by records or legend. We dig where we expect to find something, and we almost always find what we expect. But the Earth is vast, and most of it is unexplored. Consider the oceans. 70% of the planet lies beneath waves, much of it drowned coastlines that were dry land during the Ice Age. Entire continental shelves, Nagaland in the North Sea, Beringia between Siberia and Alaska, Sahul connecting Australia to New Guinea, once thrived with life and human movement. Today they are buried under meters of water and sediment, places barely touched by exploration. If a civilization once built along those coasts, their remains may still lie hidden in the silence of the seabed. Consider the ice. Greenland and Antarctica have been sealed beneath sheets kilometers thick for hundreds of thousands of years. If there were settlements before the ice advanced, they may be perfectly preserved beneath the frozen weight, waiting for someone to look. Yet drilling through those depths is a challenge few nations have even attempted. Consider the underground. Beneath our feet lie layers of history stacked like pages in a book, but most are out of reach. Excavations rarely go deeper than a few meters, while layers from 100,000 years ago could lie far below, sealed away by soil, flood, or ash. Without reason to dig that deep, they remain untouched, their secrets locked away. And finally, consider our own expectations. We are trained to recognize pyramids, pottery, bronze. We may have already held fragments of something extraordinary in our hands, dismissing them as natural stone or meaningless debris. A carved pattern mistaken for erosion. A chemical anomaly filed away as coincidence. Blindness is not only about where we look, but about what we believe is possible. The truth is that Earth is still a mystery. The deep oceans, the frozen poles, the hidden layers underground, these are worlds largely unsearched. To declare no evidence is to confuse our limited vision with certainty. And in doing so, we risk missing the very clues that could reveal an entire forgotten chapter of human history. Why imagining this matters? Perhaps no proof will ever come. Perhaps the Earth has hidden its secrets too well, burying every trace beneath oceans, ice, and time. But the value of imagining a lost civilization is not only in whether it truly existed, it is in what the exercise reveals about us. To picture an age before history where another society might have risen and vanished is to confront the fragility of our own world. We see how easily time erases. We see how little survives 100,000 years. And we realize that everything we build, our towers, our machines, our archives, could one day vanish just as completely. Nothing is permanent, not even us. Yet in that fragility lies a deeper lesson: resilience. If humanity is not the first to walk this path, then intelligence itself may be part of Earth's nature, a flame that rises again and again. Civilizations may fall, but the possibility of civilization remains. That is both humbling and comforting. We are not the center of the story, but participants in a longer cycle that transcends us. And finally, imagining this past lays responsibility at our feet. If others may have risen and fallen, then our legacy is not guaranteed. We cannot assume our knowledge will endure, or that our monuments will last. What we choose to preserve, how we choose to live, and the balance we strike with the Earth will decide whether our story becomes another forgotten chapter or a foundation for those who come after. So even if the lost civilization of 100,000 years ago remains a mystery, the act of imagining it widens our vision. It reminds us that history is not a straight line, that progress is not inevitable, and that our time in the sun is precious and fragile. In the end, the question is not just whether others came before. The question is whether, when our chapter closes, we will have left behind ruined scars and silence, or something worth remembering. Connection across deep time. What if we are not a singular miracle, but part of a repeating pattern? Not the first flame of thought to brighten this world, but one in a lineage of sparks, each flaring for a moment, each fading, and each leaving behind only whispers for the next. The Earth has lived far longer than our memories can stretch. In her silence, she may have nurtured others before us, minds that wondered, hands that shaped voices that sang beneath the same stars we gaze upon tonight. We cannot prove they existed, but absence of proof does not erase the possibility. and in that possibility lies a strange comfort. Perhaps we are connected across deep time, not by stone ruins or written words, but by something more profound, the shared rhythm of intelligence, rising, falling, and rising again. A continuity not of blood, but of potential. We are a note in a song too vast for us to hear in full, yet unmistakably part of its melody. To imagine that others once dreamed before us is to feel less alone in the universe. It suggests that intelligence is not a rare accident, but a pattern the Earth herself weaves. And if it has happened before, it may happen again, long after we are gone, long after our cities crumble and our names are forgotten. The spark may leap once more, lighting new hands, new voices, new civilizations. This thought humbles us. It unsettles us. But it also ties us to something larger, the possibility that we are not the beginning, not the end, but one luminous thread in a tapestry woven across ages. And so as we look forward into our uncertain future, we also look back into the shadows of deep time. Not to find certainty, but to feel connection, to imagine that we walk in the footsteps of forgotten kin, and that one day, long after us, others may walk in ours. History as we know it is a patchwork of fragments. A shard of pottery here, a burial there, a city's ruins half buried in sand. From these pieces we weave a story neat and linear, as if the Earth herself were a book written only once. But the Earth is no single manuscript. She is a palimpsest, an endless parchment written on erased and written again layer after layer until the ink of one age seeps faintly into the margins of another. We live in the latest chapter, but the faint smudges of earlier writing remain. Legends of floods, myths of golden ages, whispers of lost worlds. They might be nothing more than dreams, or they might be the blurred memory of civilizations erased. We cannot know for certain. Time has taken its tithe, burying both truth and lie beneath ice, sea, and stone. And so we are left with the question, are we the first dreamers of civilization or only the latest? Are our towers the first to pierce the sky, our ships the first to cross oceans, our hands the first to reach for the stars? Or do we walk in the footsteps of others whose names and stories lie hidden, scattered like dust across 100,000 years? Perhaps we will never know, but perhaps the mystery is its own gift. It humbles us, reminding us that permanence is an illusion, and that even our proudest achievements may one day vanish into silence. Yet it also binds us to something greater, the possibility that intelligence, imagination, and longing are not accidents of our age, but part of the Earth's deeper song, a melody that rises again and again across the abyss of time. As you close your eyes tonight, remember we are dreamers, yes, but maybe not the first, and maybe not the last. Thanks for being here. Hit that subscribe button and join us for the next chapters full of history and discovery.